They escaped Seoul with their lives barely. But freedom came at a price written in blood and betrayal. Now, Samantha and Hyun-woo face their most dangerous mission yet, rescuing her father from the compound where his execution is already planned. Armed with nothing but love, desperation, and a flash drive that could destroy Korea's most powerful crime family, they're about to discover that breaking into a fortress is easier than breaking free from the past. From underground tunnels to beach confrontations, from betrayal to redemption, this is where everything ends or everything begins. Watch as two people who started as enemies become the partnership that brings down an empire, proves love is stronger than violence, and fights for a future where their daughter will never know fear. The conclusion will leave you breathless. Smash that subscribe button because part 2 is where impossible becomes inevitable and true love finally wins its freedom. The plan was simple in theory, suicidal in practice. They would enter the Jong compound through the old service tunnel that connected to the basement, a relic from when Hyun-woo's grandfather had built escape routes into every property he owned. The tunnel entrance was hidden in a seafood processing plant 2 blocks away, disguised as a drainage access point. Mrs. Park had confirmed it was still functional, though rarely inspected. Once we're inside, Hyun-woo explained, spreading the blueprints across the apartment floor, we have approximately 7 minutes before the security rotation brings guards past the basement access point. We move fast, stay quiet, reach the east wing where they're keeping your father. And then, Samantha traced the route with her finger, memorizing every turn. Then we improvise. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I won't lie to you, Samantha. The odds of all 3 of us getting out alive are slim. If it comes down to a choice between saving your father and saving you, I'm choosing you. Every time. That's not your choice to make. Yes, it is. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. I'm not losing you. Not after everything. Mrs. Park cleared her throat from where she sat by the window, keeping watch. The shift change happens at 3 in the morning. That's your best window. Fewer guards, everyone tired, security monitoring less vigilant. You'll have maybe 15 minutes of optimal conditions. 15 minutes to break into a fortress, extract a prisoner, and escape without being killed. Samantha laughed without humor. I've had better odds playing the lottery. Then don't think of it as odds. Hyun-woo stood, pulling her up with him. Think of it as the only chance we have. Your father dies tomorrow if we don't act tonight. My father's patience has limits, and he's reached them. The weight of that truth settled over the room like fog. Ambassador Abiola had hours left, maybe less. Every moment they spent planning was a moment closer to his execution. Samantha looked at the man who'd been her husband for 6 weeks, this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man who'd thrown away his entire life to protect hers. He'd gone from enemy to ally to something much more complicated, something that felt dangerously like love even though neither of them had dared speak that word aloud. If this goes wrong, she said quietly, if we don't make it out, then we don't make it out together. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. I'm done running from who I want to be, Samantha. I'm done pretending I don't care. Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that these past few weeks with you have been the first time in my life I've felt truly alive. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, trying to pour everything she couldn't say into the press of lips and the tangle of hands and hair. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mrs. Park was tactfully looking out the window. We should rest, the older woman said. You'll need your strength tonight. But neither of them could sleep. They spent the remaining hours checking weapons, reviewing the plan, sitting in charged silence as afternoon bled into evening. Samantha changed into the tactical gear Mrs. Park had acquired, black cargo pants, fitted long-sleeve shirt, boots with silent rubber soles. She braided her hair tight against her scalp, securing it with elastic bands. In the mirror, she looked like someone else entirely. A woman capable of violence. A woman fighting for survival. Hyun-woo emerged from the bathroom dressed in similar black gear, a gun holstered at his hip, knife strapped to his thigh. He looked every inch the crime lord's son, trained from birth to navigate danger. But when their eyes met, she saw beneath that hardened exterior to the man who'd chosen her over his father's empire. Ready? He asked. No. She checked her own weapon, making sure the safety was on. But let's do it anyway. They left as midnight approached, Mrs. Park staying behind to monitor police scanners and news feeds, ready to warn them if anything changed. The drive to the processing plant took 40 minutes through Busan's night-quiet streets. Samantha's heart hammered against her ribs the entire way, adrenaline making every sense sharp and electric. The processing plant was closed for the night, its parking lot empty except for scattered debris and the smell of fish guts. Hyun-woo picked the lock on a side door with practiced ease, and they slipped inside, flashlights cutting through darkness thick with the stench of old seafood. The tunnel entrance was exactly where Mrs. Park had indicated, behind a stack of rotting pallets, disguised as a floor drain. Hyun-woo removed the grate, revealing a concrete shaft descending into blackness. "It's about 50 feet down," he whispered. "There's a ladder. Watch your step. Some of the rungs are rusted through." Samantha went first, her flashlight clamped between her teeth, descending into cold darkness that smelled of mildew and old water. The ladder creaked under her weight, one rung crumbling beneath her foot, but she caught herself and kept moving. Behind her, she heard Hyun-woo following, his breathing steady and controlled. At the bottom, the tunnel stretched away into darkness, roughly 6 feet high, maybe 4 feet wide, walls slick with moisture. Samantha straightened, her flashlight beam revealing an endless corridor disappearing into shadow. 2 miles, Hyun-woo said, landing beside her. "The tunnel runs under the river, comes up in the compound basement. My grandfather used it to smuggle goods during the war, before he went legitimate. Well, as legitimate as he ever got." They walked in silence, nothing but the sound of their footsteps and dripping water, both conserving energy and breath. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, time becoming elastic and strange in the darkness. Samantha's mind wandered to her father, wondering what condition he'd be in, whether he'd be able to move quickly, whether this entire insane plan would end with all of them dead. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, the tunnel began sloping upward. Hyun-woo held up a hand, signaling for silence. Ahead, a metal door appeared in the flashlight beam, sealed with a combination lock. "My grandfather's birthday," Hyun-woo whispered, spinning the dial. "He never changed it, and neither did my father. Arrogance or sentiment, I'm not sure which." The lock clicked. The door swung open with a groan that sounded deafening in the confined space. They froze, waiting for alarms or footsteps or gunfire. Nothing. Beyond the door lay the Jong compound basement, a maze of storage rooms and old furniture and boxes containing God knew what. Hyun-woo led the way with the confidence of someone who'd explored every inch of this place as a child. They moved like ghosts through darkness, avoiding the few security cameras with carefully plotted routes. "East wing, 3rd floor," Hyun-woo mouthed, pointing upward. They found the service stairs, climbing slowly, pausing at each landing to listen for guards. At the 3rd floor, Hyun-woo eased the door open a crack, peering out. 2 guards stood at the end of the hallway, talking in low voices, cigarette smoke drifting in the dim light. "I can take them," Hyun-woo whispered. "Without alerting the entire compound? Trust me." He slipped through the door before she could argue, moving with liquid silence down the hallway. Samantha watched through the crack as he approached from behind, some kind of cloth in his hand. The first guard didn't even have time to turn before Hyun-woo had the cloth pressed over his mouth and nose. The man struggled for 3 seconds, then went limp. The second guard spun, reaching for his gun, but Hyun-woo was faster, a brutal strike to the throat, followed by that same cloth, and the second guard collapsed beside the first. Chloroform, Samantha realized. He'd come prepared for silent incapacitation. Hyun-woo dragged both bodies into a nearby room, then gestured for her to follow. They moved quickly now, knowing the unconscious guards gave them a timer, maybe 30 minutes before someone noticed their absence. The room where they'd imprisoned her father was at the hall's end, recognizable by the heavy lock and the additional guards stationed outside. This one was alert, standing at attention, one hand on his weapon. No way to approach without being seen. Samantha made a decision. She stepped out from the shadows, hands raised, walking directly toward the guard. "Don't shoot," she said in Korean, the words clumsy but clear. "I'm Samantha Jong. I'm here to surrender." The guard's eyes widened. He grabbed his radio, but before he could speak, Hyenwoo appeared behind him, moving so fast he was almost invisible. A precise strike to the base of the skull, and the guard crumpled. That was reckless, Hyenwoo hissed, catching the guard before he hit the floor. It worked, didn't it? He muttered something in Korean that sounded like a curse, then pulled keys from the guard's belt. The door's lock disengaged with a heavy click. Hyenwoo pushed it open, gun raised, ready for anything. Inside, the room was sparse: a bed, a chair, a bathroom visible through an open door. And slumped in the chair, hands bound, face bruised and swollen, sat Ambassador Abiola. "Daddy." Samantha rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty. "Samantha." His voice was thick, slurred from pain or drugs. No, you shouldn't be here. It's a trap, baby girl, We know it's a trap." She pulled out a knife, sawing through the zip ties binding his wrists. "And we're not leaving you here to die. Can you walk?" "I can try." He struggled to stand, and she saw the extent of his injuries: ribs taped, one leg dragging, blood crusted in his hair. They'd beaten him systematically, methodically, punishment and interrogation combined. Hyenwoo appeared at her side, helping lift her father. "We need to move. Now." That guard had time to trigger a silent alarm. "We have maybe 3 minutes before." Alarms shrieked through the building. "Or less," Hyenwoo finished grimly. They half-carried, half-dragged Ambassador Abiola toward the door. In the hallway, they heard running footsteps, shouted orders, the compound coming alive with hostile intent. Hyenwoo fired twice at guards appearing at the hall's far end, driving them back, then grabbed Samantha's arm. "Service stairs. Move." They ran, Ambassador Abiola gasping with pain between them, alarms wailing, footsteps thundering from every direction. At the stairwell, they encountered 4 guards rushing upward. Hyenwoo put 2 down with precise shots, but the other 2 returned fire, bullets sparking off metal railings. Samantha fired her weapon for the first time in her life, the recoil shocking, the noise deafening in the enclosed space. She missed wildly, but it gave Hyenwoo time to take proper aim. Both guards dropped. "Keep moving." He was already heading down, pulling them with him. They burst into the basement, sprinting toward the tunnel entrance. Behind them, the stairwell door exploded open, more guards pouring through. Bullets chewed through concrete walls, dust and debris filling the air. Hyenwoo returned fire, his expression cold and focused, buying them seconds. Samantha dragged her father toward the tunnel door, every step an eternity, her lungs burning, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. They reached the door. She shoved her father through, then turned back for Hyenwoo. He was still firing, backing toward them, empty magazine hitting the floor as he reloaded with fluid practice. A bullet caught his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He stumbled but kept moving, kept firing, blood spreading across his tactical shirt. "Hyenwoo!" Samantha screamed. He dove through the door. She slammed it shut, spinning the combination lock, hearing bullets impact the other side like thunder. "Go!" Hyenwoo gasped, clutching his shoulder. "They'll find another way around. We need distance." They ran through the tunnel, Ambassador Abiola somehow finding strength born of pure survival instinct, all 3 of them splashing through standing water, lungs burning, legs screaming. Behind them, they heard the door being breached, heard pursuit beginning. The ladder appeared in their flashlight beams. Samantha went up first, scrambling with desperate speed, then reached down to help her father. He climbed with agonizing slowness, each rung a small victory. Hyenwoo came last, one arm useless, hauling himself up with sheer determination. They emerged into the processing plant just as their pursuers reached the tunnel's base. Hyenwoo grabbed a heavy pallet, tipping it over the tunnel entrance, buying them precious seconds. Outside, the car waited where they'd left it. They piled in, Samantha in the driver's seat because Hyenwoo's shoulder made driving impossible. She'd never driven in Korea before, never navigated these streets, but adrenaline and necessity made her capable of anything. She floored the accelerator, tires screaming, the car fishtailing before straightening. In the rearview mirror, she saw men emerging from the processing plant, saw them raising weapons. Gunfire shattered the rear window. Samantha swerved, taking corners at speeds that felt suicidal, putting distance between them and their pursuers. Beside her, Hyen-woo pressed his good hand against his bleeding shoulder, his face pale but determined. In the back seat, her father had passed out from pain and exhaustion. "Where are we going?" she asked, not recognizing these streets. "Safe house is compromised. They'll have it surrounded by now." Hyen-woo's voice was tight with pain. "Head for the docks. There's a shipping container terminal. I have contacts there who owe me favors. We can hide, regroup, figure out next steps." The docks materialized out of darkness, a forest of metal containers and cranes, mostly deserted at this hour. Samantha followed Hyen-woo's directions to a maintenance yard where a man in coveralls waited, cigarette glowing in the darkness. "You look like hell," the man said to Hyen-woo in Korean. "I need a place to lay low. 3 people, 1 injured. 24 hours, maybe less." The man studied them, his expression unreadable. "Chairman Jong has put out a bounty. 1 million won for information leading to your capture. 2 million for your head." "I know. Will you help us or not?" Another long moment. Then the man nodded. "Your grandfather once saved my father's life. I pay my debts. Container 7G. It's empty, has ventilation, some supplies. But after tonight, we're even." "Understood. Understood. Thank you." The man walked away without another word. They found Container 7G, a 40-foot metal box that smelled of rust and industrial chemicals, but offered shelter and darkness. Inside, someone had left blankets, water, a first aid kit. Not much, but more than nothing. Samantha immediately went to work on Hyen-woo's shoulder, cutting away his shirt to expose the wound. The bullet had gone through cleanly, missing bone and major arteries lucky, given everything else. "This is going to hurt," she warned, dousing the wound with antiseptic. He gritted his teeth, but didn't make a sound as she cleaned and bandaged the injury, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crash making her shake. When she finished, he caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. "You drove like you were being chased by the devil," he said with a ghost of a smile. "I was being chased by your father's men. Close enough." She turned to check on her father, who was semi-conscious, breathing raggedly. His injuries were beyond her ability to treat. He needed a hospital, proper medical care. "We can't stay here long," she said. "Daddy needs a doctor. And your shoulder. We'll heal. But you're right about your father." Hyen-woo struggled to sit up, wincing. "There's a doctor in the Port District who treats people with no questions asked. Used to patch up my grandfather's men back in the day. If she's still alive, still practicing, she might help us." "Might? It's the best option we have." He pulled out his phone, miraculously unbroken despite everything, and made a call. The conversation was brief, terse, conducted entirely in Korean. When he hung up, he looked relieved. "She'll see us. But we need to move now, before my father's men expand their search grid to include the docks." Getting Ambassador Abiola back into the car was an exercise in controlled agony. The man was fading, shock and blood loss taking their toll. Samantha drove with her heart in her throat, following Hyen-woo's directions to a small clinic wedged between a convenience store and a hardware shop in a neighborhood that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1980s. The doctor was a woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and hands that moved with practiced confidence. She took one look at Ambassador Abiola and immediately began issuing orders in rapid Korean, preparing an exam room, starting in 4, assessing damage with clinical efficiency. "He'll live," she told them in accented English after an hour of treatment. "But he needs rest. Real rest, not running from people trying to kill him." "How long?" Samantha asked. 3 days minimum before he can travel safely. "A week would be better." "We don't have a week." Hyen-woo was looking at his phone, at the news alerts flooding in. "It's already starting. The police have issued warrants. My cousin's giving interviews claiming I've been radicalized by my foreign wife, that I'm suffering some kind of mental break. He's positioning himself as the stable heir, the one who can restore order." Samantha moved to look over his shoulder. Every major news outlet in Korea was covering the story, the heir to the Jong Empire on the run with his Nigerian bride, accused of conspiracy, murder, betrayal. Ji-hoon's face appeared in interview after interview, his expression grave and concerned, playing the role of loyal family member trying to bring his wayward cousin home. He's erasing you, Samantha realized. Making you the villain so he can take your place. Which means he needs me dead to complete the narrative. Alive, I'm a threat. Dead, I'm a tragic cautionary tale. Hein Wu's jaw tightened. We need to release the next batch of information. Now, before he can control the story completely. They spent the next hour in the clinic's back room, uploading files, sending evidence to every news outlet and law enforcement agency they could think of. This batch was more damaging than the first, detailed financial records showing Ji-hoon's own criminal activities, evidence of his involvement in drug trafficking that violated even Chairman Jong's supposed moral lines, messages proving he'd orchestrated Minister Kim's poisoning specifically to frame Samantha. This will turn my father against him, Hein Wu said with grim satisfaction. Father may be many things, but he has rules about drugs. Ji-hoon crossed a line he can't uncross. They hit send, watching the digital time bomb deploy across cyberspace. Within minutes, the story began shifting. News outlets picked up the new information, started asking harder questions. Social media exploded with speculation and outrage. The narrative Ji-hoon had been building so carefully started cracking at the foundations. Samantha's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Park. Police raided the safe house. I escaped. On my way to you. Chairman Jong knows about the evidence release. He's furious. Ji-hoon is being detained for questioning. The empire is fracturing. It's working, Samantha breathed. We're actually tearing it down. Don't celebrate yet. Hein Wu showed her another message, this one from an unknown number. You've made your point, son. Come home. We'll negotiate terms. Your wife and her father can leave Korea safely if you return. You have my word. It's a trap, Samantha said immediately. Of course it's a trap. But it's also an opportunity. Hein Wu's mind was already working through angles, calculating risks. My father's offering terms because we've hurt him badly enough that he's willing to negotiate. That means we have leverage. Real leverage. Or it means he's desperate enough to say anything to get you back, so he can kill you properly. Both can be true. Hein Wu typed a response. Face-to-face meeting. Neutral location. Just you and me. No guards, no weapons. We talk like father and son, not enemies. The response came quickly. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. Houndy Beach, by the old lighthouse. Come alone. Samantha grabbed his arm. You can't seriously be considering this. I'm considering ending this without more bloodshed. I'm considering giving us a chance at actually surviving instead of spending the rest of our lives running. He turned to face her fully. Samantha, we can't win by force. My father has too many resources, too many loyal men. But we can win by making him choose between his pride and his empire. Between killing me and saving what's left of his legacy. That's a hell of a gamble. It's the only gamble we have. He cupped her face in his hands. If it goes wrong, if I don't come back, you take your father and you run. The evidence we've uploaded has automatic dead man switches. It keeps releasing on a schedule unless I input a code every week. You'll be protected as long as that information exists. I'm not letting you walk into a trap alone. Yes, you are. Because this is my family, my blood, my mess to clean up. And because his voice softened. Because I need to know you're safe. That's the only way I can face my father without fear clouding my judgment. They argued for another hour, but Samantha knew she'd already lost. Hein Wu had made up his mind with the same cold determination that had let him survive years in his father's world. He would meet Chairman Jong face to face, and either they'd find peace or one of them would die. The next morning came too quickly. Hein Wu dressed in simple clothes, dark jeans, a white shirt, no armor or weapons. He looked younger somehow, more vulnerable, the ruthless crime air stripped away to reveal just a man hoping to survive. If this goes sideways, he told Samantha, holding her close one last time, don't try to be a hero. Just run. Promise me. She couldn't promise that, couldn't lie to him in what might be their final moment together. Instead, she kissed him with everything she had, all her fear and love and fury poured into the press of lips and the desperate grip of her hands in his hair. Come back to me, she whispered against his mouth. That's my condition. You come back or I'm coming after you with everything I have. He smiled, real and warm and heartbreaking. I'll do my best. Then he was gone, walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight, heading toward whatever fate awaited him at Houndy Beach. Samantha watched from the clinic window, her heart in her throat, knowing she should stay put, should trust him, should honor his wishes. But trust had never been her strong suit. She turned to the doctor. "I need a car. And a gun if you have one." The old woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "In the garage. Keys are in the ignition. Guns in the glove box. Try not to get my car shot up, I'm rather fond of it." 15 minutes later, Samantha was driving toward Houndy Beach, her father unconscious in the passenger seat because she refused to leave him alone and vulnerable. She parked a quarter-mile from the lighthouse, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to stay unnoticed. Through binoculars borrowed from the doctor's survival kit, she watched Hien-woo approach the old lighthouse. Chairman Jong was already there, standing alone as promised, looking older and smaller somehow without his usual entourage of guards and power. Father and son faced each other across 20 feet of sand, the ocean crashing behind them, the afternoon sun painting everything gold and amber. From her distance, Samantha couldn't hear their words, could only watch body language, Chairman Jong's rigid posture, Hien-woo's careful stillness, both men circling each other like wounded animals. The conversation went on for 10 minutes, 15, 20. At one point, Chairman Jong's shoulders slumped, something like grief crossing his features. Hien-woo stepped closer, reaching out as though to comfort his father. That's when Samantha saw the glint of metal. No, she was already running, already pulling the gun from her jacket, legs pumping across sand that grabbed at her feet like quicksand. Chairman Jong had pulled a knife, was lunging at Hien-woo with surprising speed for a man his age. Hien-woo twisted away, but not fast enough. The blade caught his side, blood blooming across his white shirt. Samantha fired into the air. The gunshot cracked like thunder, freezing both men. "Step away from him." She aimed at Chairman Jong, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I will put you down, old man. Don't test me." Chairman Jong looked at her with something like respect. "The Nigerian bride. You're more formidable than I gave you credit for. I'm done being underestimated by men who think women are just pieces to move around their chessboard." She kept the gun trained on him while moving to Hien-woo's side. The wound was bleeding but not arterial. He'd live if she got him out of here. "You've destroyed everything," Chairman Jong said, his voice hollow. "My empire, my legacy, my son's loyalty. What more do you want from me? I want you to let us go. I want you to accept that your world is over, that the evidence we've released has already toppled your throne, and that trying to kill us won't bring any of it back." Samantha's voice was steel. "I want you to be a father instead of a monster, just this once, and let your son live. And if I refuse? Then I pull this trigger, and you die here on this beach never knowing if you could have been redeemed. Your choice." The standoff stretched between them, tension thick as humidity. Then Chairman Jong dropped the knife. It fell to the sand with a muted thump, blood still wet on the blade. "You win," he said simply. "Take him. Leave Korea. Don't come back." He looked at Hien-woo, and for the first time, Samantha saw genuine emotion in the old man's eyes, regret, perhaps, or the ghost of love long buried under years of cruelty. "You're no longer my son, but you're free." Hien-woo straightened, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. "I stopped being your son the day you chose power over people. But I hope someday you understand why I made the choices I made." "I understand perfectly." Chairman Jong turned away, walking toward a car Samantha hadn't noticed before. "You chose her over everything. Love over loyalty. In my world, that's the greatest weakness. In yours, perhaps it's the greatest strength. We'll never know which of us was right." He drove away, leaving them alone on the beach with blood in the sand and the taste of impossible victory. The next 72 hours were a blur of motion and desperate planning. The doctor patched Hien-woo's knife wound, another scar to add to his collection. Mrs. Park appeared with forged passports and a contact who could get them out of Korea via cargo ship to the Philippines, then on to Africa. Ambassador Abiola regained enough strength to travel, though he'd carry the marks of his imprisonment for the rest of his life. They left on a foggy morning when the docks were busy enough that 3 more passengers went unnoticed. Samantha stood at the ship's railing as Busan disappeared into mist, feeling the weight of everything lift incrementally with each mile of ocean between them and Korea. Hien-woo appeared beside her, moving carefully because of his injuries, but alive, miraculously alive. Any regrets? He asked. About destroying a criminal empire, nearly getting killed multiple times, and becoming an international fugitive? She pretended to consider. No, surprisingly few regrets. He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. What about marrying the enemy? Any regrets there? Samantha turned to face him fully, this complicated man who'd become her partner in every sense. You stopped being the enemy the moment you chose me over your father's approval. Now you're just the man she paused, the word catching in her throat. Love, he supplied gently. Love, she confirmed. Against all logic and reason and survival instinct, yes. I love you. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, the ocean wind tangling their hair together, mixing black and black until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. They arrived in Lagos 3 weeks later, after a journey that took them through 6 countries and countless close calls. Nigeria welcomed Samantha home with chaos and color and the kind of humid heat that felt like an embrace. Ambassador Abiola wept when he saw familiar streets, the guilt of what he'd done warring with the joy of survival. Samantha rented a small apartment in Victoria Island, far from her father's old neighborhood, far from anyone who might recognize them. Hyenwoo adapted to African life with the same determination he'd brought to everything else, learning Yoruba phrases, navigating Lagos traffic, finding work doing consulting for shipping companies who needed someone who understood Asian markets. They lived quietly, carefully, always watching for signs that Chairman Zhang had changed his mind about letting them live. But months passed, then a year, and no assassins came. The old man had kept his word, it seemed. Or perhaps the continuing release of evidence had damaged his empire too badly for him to spare resources on revenge. News from Korea came in fragments. Ji-hoon had been arrested, tried, convicted of drug trafficking and conspiracy to commit murder. Chairman Zhang had retired from public life, his business holdings seized or frozen, the mighty Zhang syndicate reduced to scattered remnants fighting over scraps. The government had fallen, new elections called, reforms promised. Samantha and Hyenwoo had burned down an empire, and from the ashes, something better was trying to grow. On their first wedding anniversary, the real one, not the forced ceremony in Seoul, Hyenwoo took Samantha to a beach on Lagos's coast. They walked barefoot in sand that was nothing like the blood-stained beach where his father had tried to kill him, everything warm and alive and full of possibility. I never thanked you, he said, stopping to face her as sunset painted the sky in impossible colors. For saving my life. Multiple times, actually. You saved mine first. I figured we were even. Still. Thank you. For being brave enough to fight when you could have run. For believing I could be more than my father's son. For, he dropped to one knee, pulling a simple ring from his pocket. For making me want to be worthy of you. Samantha Abiola. We're already married by law and circumstance, but I want to marry you by choice. Will you choose me, knowing everything you know, understanding exactly who I am and what I've done? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes. Every day I choose you. Every damn day. He slipped the ring onto her finger, nothing expensive or flashy, just a band of twisted silver that somehow meant more than all the diamonds in Korea. Then he stood and kissed her while waves crashed around their feet and the sun set on one chapter of their lives, making space for whatever came next. They were married again 3 days later, a small ceremony with just Ambassador Abiola and Mrs. Park who'd followed them to Lagos because, as she said, someone needed to make sure they ate properly and didn't do anything too stupid. It was nothing like the cold political wedding in Seoul. This was warm and real and chosen, vows spoken in English and Korean and Yoruba, a blending of worlds and cultures and 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances and decided to build something bright. 5 years later, Samantha stood in front of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, testifying about organized crime, corruption, and the systems that enable both. She'd gone back to school, earned her law degree, become the thing she'd always dreamed of being, someone who fought for justice, who spoke for those without voices, who remembered that girl trapped in a marble hallway watching men drag away bodies and refused to let that be the end of her story. Hyenwoo sat in the gallery, watching his wife dismantle criminal organizations with nothing but words and evidence and furious determination. Their daughter, 3 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's careful observation, sat on his lap, playing with his tie, oblivious to the weight of the moment. After the testimony, after the journalists had gotten their quotes and the cameras had stopped flashing, they walked through the Hague streets like a normal family. Not fugitives, not victims, not survivors of impossible odds. Just people who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, building a life from the rubble of the old one. "Do you ever miss Korea?" Samantha asked that evening, after they'd put their daughter to bed in their modest apartment. Hyun-woo considered the question, looking out at the Dutch skyline that was nothing like Seoul's glittering chaos. "I miss what it could have been. The version where my family chose honor over power, where my grandfather's legacy meant something good. But the actual Korea I left behind? The one built on blood and fear? No, that's not something worth missing." "Your father died last month," Samantha said quietly. She'd seen the obituary online, had debated whether to tell him. "Heart attack. Natural causes." "I know." Ji-hoon sent a message through an intermediary. Asked if I wanted to come to the funeral. He smiled without humor. I declined. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash. "Do you think he ever regretted it? Any of it?" "My father." Hyun-woo was quiet for a long moment. "I think he regretted losing control, losing his empire. But whether he regretted the choices that led there, the violence, the corruption, the way he treated people like chess pieces? Probably not. Men like him don't change, Samantha. They just lose, eventually, and the world moves on without them." She curled against him on the couch, fitting into the familiar spaces they'd carved out together over years of learning each other's shapes. "We did something impossible, didn't we? We survived when we shouldn't have. We won when we had no right to. We loved when it was stupid to love," he added, pressing a kiss to her hair. "That might be the most impossible thing of all." In the other room, their daughter made a small sound in her sleep, not distress, just the soft murmur of dreams. They'd named her Adiz, daughter of kings, a Nigerian name for a girl who carried both their worlds in her blood. She would grow up free of the violence that had marked her parents' lives, free to choose her own path, to love without calculating the cost of survival. That was what they'd fought for, really. Not revenge, not justice in any abstract sense, but the simple, radical act of making space for love to exist without violence trailing behind it. "I'm writing a book," Samantha said suddenly, "about everything that happened. The trafficking networks, the corruption, how organizations like your father's operate. But also about us. About how two people trapped in impossible circumstances found a way forward. Using our real names? Changed, but recognizable to anyone who knows the story. I want people to understand that these systems don't just hurt strangers in news reports. They hurt real people, destroy real families, and sometimes, if you're very lucky and very stubborn, you can fight back and win." Hyun-woo smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way it never had during their early days. "You're going to put a target on your back all over again. Every crime organization that reads it will see themselves, will feel exposed. Good. Let them feel exposed. Let them be afraid for once, instead of making everyone else live in fear." She turned to look at him directly. "Are you okay with that? With me making us visible again? I married a woman who drove through Seoul like a getaway driver with no training and shot at my family's guards without hesitation. I knew what I was signing up for." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Write the book. Expose every dark corner. I'll be right beside you, whatever comes." The book was published 18 months later under both their names, Samantha Abiola Jong and Hyun-woo Jong, no longer hiding, no longer running. Married to the Enemy, How Love Dismantled a Criminal Empire became an international bestseller, praised by human rights organizations and law enforcement, denounced by the same corrupt systems it exposed. Death threats came, as expected. So did letters from survivors of trafficking, from people trapped in situations like theirs, from readers who found hope in the idea that love could be stronger than the violence trying to destroy it. Samantha gave speeches at universities and conferences, Hyun-woo beside her, both of them speaking truth to power in rooms full of people who needed to hear that change was possible. Their daughter attended when she was old enough to understand, watching her parents turn their trauma into testimony, their survival into purpose. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to Korea for the first time since fleeing. Not to Seoul, That city held too many ghosts, but to Busan, to the coastline where they'd hidden and planned and fallen in love in a container that smelled like rust and desperation. The old lighthouse at Houndy Beach still stood, weathered but enduring. They walked the sand where blood had once stained the ground, where Chairman Zhang had tried to kill his own son, where Samantha had pulled a trigger and changed the trajectory of all their lives. It looks different, Hyenwoo said, staring at the spot. Smaller somehow. Less significant. Because we're different. We're not those desperate people anymore, running for our lives with nothing but hope and stubbornness. Samantha took his hand, their fingers interlocking automatically after years of practice. We won, Hyenwoo. Not perfectly, not without scars, but we won. We built a life. We raised a daughter who's never had to calculate the cost of love. We turned a forced marriage into a real one. The enemy became home, he said softly, echoing words from years ago. The enemy became everything. She kissed him there on that beach, in the country that had tried to destroy them both, claiming victory in the simplest way possible, by still being alive, still being together, still choosing each other against all the odds that had tried to tear them apart. Ambassador Abiola had passed away 2 years earlier, finally succumbing to the injuries and stress his body had endured. But before he died, he told Samantha he was proud of her, that watching her transform pain into purpose had given his last years meaning. She'd forgiven him, not completely, some betrayals were too deep for complete absolution, but enough. Enough to let him die knowing his daughter had survived his choices and made something beautiful anyway. Mrs. Park lived in their guest house now, helping raise Adiz, teaching her Korean alongside Yoruba and English, making sure the girl understood all 3 cultures that made up her heritage. The old woman who'd risked everything to help them escape had become family in the truest sense, chosen, beloved, irreplaceable. Ji-hoon remained in prison, his release date decades away. Samantha had testified at his trial via video link, had watched justice, imperfect and slow but real, finally catch up to him. He glared at her through the screen with such hatred that it should have frightened her. Instead, she'd felt nothing but pity for a man who'd gambled everything on cruelty and lost. The Zhang Empire was gone, truly gone. The properties had been sold or seized, the money distributed to victims' funds and rehabilitation programs. The name that had once meant power and fear now meant caution tale, a story told to business students about how corruption inevitably collapses under its own weight. From the ruins, Hyenwoo had built something new, a legitimate shipping company focused on ethical supply chains and worker protections, everything his grandfather's business should have been. It operated at a fraction of the old empire's size, but with none of the blood money, and he ran it with the same strategic brilliance he'd once used to survive his father's world. They'd turned weapons into tools, turned survival instincts into business acumen, turned the education in violence into an understanding of how to build systems that prevented violence instead of perpetuating it. As they walked back from the beach that anniversary day, Adiz ran ahead, chasing seagulls and laughing with the unself-conscious joy of a child who'd never known fear. Samantha watched her daughter, this impossible miracle born from a marriage that started as a death sentence, and felt overwhelming gratitude for every choice that had led to this moment. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd made different choices? Hyenwoo asked. If I'd let you take the fall for Minister Kim's death? If you'd run instead of coming after me at the beach? If either of us had been a little less stubborn or a little more self-preserving? Every day, Samantha admitted. But then I remember that we didn't make different choices. We made these choices. The hard ones, the dangerous ones, the ones that kept faith with who we wanted to be instead of who we were expected to be. No regrets? Oh, I have regrets. I regret not shooting your cousin when I had the chance. I regret every moment of pain you endured because of me. I regret that our daughter will grow up knowing her grandfather tried to murder her father. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. But I don't regret you. I don't regret us. I don't regret choosing love even when it was the stupidest, most dangerous, most impossible choice available. He pulled her close, and they stood there on the Busan street with their daughter playing nearby and the ocean wind carrying the smell of salt and possibility. 2 people who'd been married as strangers, who'd become allies in desperation, who'd chosen each other when choice finally became possible. The story has a happy ending, Hyenwoo said, a note of wonder in his voice. Against all odds and logic, we actually got our happy ending. Not an ending, Samantha corrected. A beginning. We're still writing this story, Hyenwoo. Every day, we're still choosing what comes next. And they did. They chose breakfast together and bedtime stories and arguments about whose turn it was to do dishes. They chose date nights and family vacations and the mundane magic of ordinary life. They chose to keep fighting for justice while building joy. They chose each other, over and over, in 1,000 small ways that added up to a life neither of them could have imagined in that marble hallway where their story began. Years later, when Adiz was old enough to ask questions, she found her parents' wedding photo from Seoul, the cold, formal image of a Nigerian woman and a Korean man who looked like strangers forced together by circumstance. "You both look so sad," she said, studying the photograph with a child's brutal honesty. "We were," Samantha confirmed, sitting beside her daughter. "That wasn't a real wedding. That was two people trapped in other people's plans, trying to survive." "So when did it become real?" Samantha looked at Hyenwoo, who smiled from across the room where he was reviewing contracts for his shipping company. "When did the marriage of convenience become the love of her life? When did the enemy become home?" "It became real," she said slowly, "the moment we decided to save each other instead of ourselves. The moment we chose to be partners instead of prisoners. The moment we looked at each other and saw not what we'd been forced to become, but what we could choose to be together." "That's very romantic, Mom," Adiz said with the skepticism of a preteen. "But also kind of dramatic." "Sweetheart," Hyenwoo interjected, "your mother once drove through downtown Seoul at 90 miles an hour while being shot at, then pulled a gun on my father to save my life. Dramatic is just how we do things in this family." Adiz laughed, and the sound was joy distilled to its purest form. She returned to her homework, already moving on to the next thing, the way children do when they're secure in their parents' love. Later that night, after their daughter was asleep and the house was quiet, Samantha and Hyenwoo sat together in the darkness, hands intertwined, comfortable in the silence that came from years of learning each other's rhythms. "I was thinking," Hyenwoo said eventually, "about what you told Adiz. About when the marriage became real. And I think it became real even earlier than that. I think it became real the first time you looked at me like I was a person instead of a prison. When you demanded truth instead of accepting comfortable lies. When you made me want to be better than the man my father raised." He turned to her in the darkness. "You saved me long before that beach, Samantha. You saved me by refusing to let me pretend I was only what circumstances had made me." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of all the years they'd built together. "We saved each other. That's how the best love stories work. Not one person rescuing another, but two people deciding they're worth fighting for, together." "Is that going in the sequel?" he teased. She'd been working on a follow-up book, this one focused on rebuilding after trauma, on how survivors could reclaim their narratives. "Maybe. If you're okay with me getting philosophical about us in print. I married a woman who put our entire story in a best-selling book. I think that ship has sailed regarding privacy." He pulled her closer. "Besides, if our story helps even one person understand they can survive the impossible, it's worth every uncomfortable interview and invasion of privacy." That was the man she'd married, not the cold air she'd first met, but the person he'd become when given the chance to choose himself. Brave enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be gentle, wise enough to understand that true power came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. The moon rose over their home in Lagos, casting silver light through windows that had never known bars or guards or the weight of surveillance. Inside, a family slept imperfect and scarred and miraculously whole, built from the wreckage of two destroyed lives and the stubborn refusal to let that destruction be the end of the story. Outside, the world kept turning. Crime syndicates still operated, though with more difficulty thanks to the reforms Samantha's testimony had helped implement. Corruption still existed, though now it had to hide better, work harder, fear exposure more. Change was slow and incomplete, but it was happening. And in that house in Lagos, two people who'd been married as strangers slept in each other's arms, having long since stopped being the enemy and become, against all odds and expectations, the love story neither of them had dared hope was possible. The girl who'd been sold to settle her father's debts had become a woman who fought for justice. The boy who'd been raised to inherit a criminal empire had become a man who built legitimate businesses. Together, they'd become something neither could have been alone: partners, lovers, parents, survivors who'd transformed their trauma into purpose and their forced marriage into a choice they made new every single day. That was the real victory in the end. Not destroying the Zhong Empire, though that mattered. Not escaping with their lives, though that was crucial. The real victory was in proving that love could exist without violence, that choice could replace coercion, that two people bound by the worst circumstances could unbind themselves and choose to stay together anyway. Married to the enemy became married to the love of my life, became simply married, in all the beautiful, ordinary